So yeah, let's destroy the Earth with a black hole. Hey, and welcome to Breaking Earth. This is an effects sequence I've returned to over the years, starting way back in 2008 when I was asked to come up with a way to suck a planet into a black hole. Weird thing was, this wasn't anything to do with Star Trek, but then less than a year later the Kelvinverse showed us what that might look like. Using Cinema 4D Studio, a broken up sphere and thinking particles, I got a pretty good look, except that on my work PC, pretty powerful for the time, it took 3 full days to render. The production never got made, but this effect kept me wondering. Years later, this clip from Andrew Kramer inspired me to see how close I could get using VC Element. And it rendered in 90 minutes. So yeah, it's not as good. Which brings me to now, 2022, and I've revisited this almost 15-year-old project, and oh my god, seriously? Ahem. This is a mammoth project, so I'm breaking it into 3 parts. I'm going to take Andrew Kramer's Ultra Earth project, where he used 6K texture maps with his free plugin Orb, and I'm going to reconfigure the texture map so that the top of the sphere is at the coordinates I'll place the black hole. This will allow me to animate the cracks, dust effects and so on to move from the top down and have them appear to radiate where we want. It's taking advantage of how texture maps onto a circle, and after this setup makes everything a lot easier. After doing that, the second video will transition the planet's surface through breaking up to collapsing, and the final video will cover using turbulent noise to simulate 3D particles collapsing into a point. Let's jump into After Effects. First thing I'm going to do is not use Andrew Kramer's Ultra Earth project, as my graphics card couldn't handle the 6K textures. Instead, I resized them to 2K and I used those for my Earth storm labels and aurora tutorials. Links are all in the description. Solo the orb planet layer, not the clouds or the atmosphere. And if you're using my project, you'll see all the rotation controls are linked up to a null layer already. Double click on rotation Y and twirl down the expression controls, and edit the expression to remove the time section, so that the planet won't keep rotating. Now go to Composition, New Composition. Create a square comp. I made mine 2000 by 2000 pixels. Call it Plane to Sphere. Now I've kept the original textures, so drag in the diffuse layer. Create a new solid. Call it Orb. And now go to Effect, Video Copilot, Orb. My comp is 2000 pixels square, so I'm setting the radius to be a little under that, 940. So the edges of the sphere touch the edges of the comp. In Maps, set the diffuse layer to your Earth diffuse layer. If it's black, then your GPU can't handle the 2K texture, and you might need to resize the images. You might want to try the 6K textures and use those instead. Set X rotation to 90 so we see the top of the globe. In Material, set Glossiness to 0 and set Specular to 0 too. Expand UV, and using the UV repeat Y property, increase the amount until you can see all of Antarctica. We don't want any blue though. Oh no, the flat earthers were right. Weird bit of shading. In Material, expand Advanced Options and check Unlit Only. Now, using the rotation controls, roll the sphere until the ground zero for the black hole is in the centre of the circle. I'm centering mine roughly where I think CERN and the Large Hadron Collider is. Something's got to create the black hole, right? In the project window, drag Plane to Sphere onto the New Comp button. Open the comp, and then go to Composition, Composition Settings. Rename it to Sphere to Texture, and set the height to be half the width. VC Orb uses 2:1 texture maps. Then go to Effect, Distort, Polar Coordinates, and set the interpolation to 100%. Expand the layer's transform properties and set the Y anchor to be 0 and the Y position to 0 too. Then uncheck the scale's uniform setting, set the scale to be -100% wide and 71% high. Honestly, I'm not sure why the height has to be 71%, but I want to fill the comp's screen, and messing with the anchor and position values made this easy to do. In a quirk of this setup, the texture is flipped horizontally, so setting the X scale to -100, flip that back. You'll see it looks really weird, but the top of the comp is going to wrap around the top of the sphere and be shrunk to a much smaller space than in the middle of the comp. I'm now going to save this out, basically to prevent unnecessarily taxing my computer. But I did notice I get a small edge effect with a tiny gap. So first duplicate this layer and set the X scale to be -101% on the bottom layer, just to fill it in. Now to render this out, you can either use FX Console's camera tool, or go to Composition, Save Frame As, and then in the render queue, save as a PNG file. Saving the frame produces an ever so slightly sharper image in my opinion. Once you've done that, we also need to export the normal texture, the glossiness, and the illumination options. In your plane to sphere comp, select the diffuse layer and holding the Alt key, drag in the normal texture. Switch to the sphere to texture comp and export this image too, and repeat for the others. This whole recentering approach is the only one that worked for me, but if you have an alternative way, let me know in the comments. Good news is, once you're done, you can close both comps. Everything more or less onwards is all about the look of the effect and not the mechanics. Back in the main comp, you'll see the texture layers or users. Select each texture in turn, hold down Alt and drag in the new recentered images onto the selected layer, which swaps it into place. When you're done, I have all the knobs parented to an earth null. Rotate that null around until you can see everything looking normal again. Right-click on the Earth diffuse layer and choose Pre-compose. When we start to animate the destruction, we'll put it all into this comp. And just to show you why we've done all this, just watch what happens when I drag the Earth diffuse layer up in the pre-comp and then switch back to the main comp. We get this cool sucking into a point effect. And because we've spent all that time working with a spherical mesh, we can now animate a whole lot of noise layers moving up in the pre-comp, and this will look like they're being pulled into a central singularity. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to Layer, New, Solid. Make it comp sized and white. This is going to be a whole bunch of surface cracks, which I'll animate on. So hit Enter and rename it to Cracks. Then go to Effect, Generate Cell Pattern. Set the type to Pillow, and set the size to as small as you can bear. I'm setting mine to 15, so that it shows up well enough for the screen recording, and then check the Invert button. Now go to Effect, Transition, Linear Wipe. This is going to end up controlling quite a bit of the other elements, so set the angle to 0, and the feather to 100, and then set keyframes for the transition that seem right to you. I'm setting a keyframe at 5 seconds to 100%, and then another at 25 seconds to 0%. Now, right-click on this layer and choose Pre-compose, and move all attributes. Then, on our Earth's surface layer, set the track matte to Luma Inverted. And if I set the checkerboard for the comp and scrub forward, you can see the cracks are cutting out the surface. In the main comp, that creates this spider's web crater. And we need to fill in those cracks with lava. So, create a new solid, drag it to the bottom of the comp, and in the Effects and Presets panel, search for Magma, and apply the Magma background preset Adobe handily provides. Solo that layer, and in Transform, click on the stopwatches to remove the keyframes, and then drop the scale to 15. Hit U to expose the evolution property on the timeline, hold Alt and click on the stopwatch, and type time times 100, so that it will animate forever. Unsolo the layer, and that's pretty good. Now for the land masses that looks about right, but we need some churning water for the oceans. Create a new solid, call it oceans. Then select our cracks pre-comp layer and holding Ctrl tap the D key to duplicate it and drag it above the oceans layer. Set the oceans track matte to alpha matte, so it will wipe on with the same timing as the cracks layer. Now we need it to only wipe on the water. From the project panel, drag in our recentered glossiness texture. Solo it and you can see its grayscale water and black continents. Go to Effect, Color Correction, Levels. And push the black and white values together until you get, well, this. Unsolo the layer, padlock it and turn it off. Back on the oceans layer, go to Effect, Channel, Set Matte. And select our glossiness layer and effects and masks. And take matte from to luminance. So we get to have two matte layers controlling our oceans layer, which is a pretty cool trick. For the foaming oceans, go to Effect, Noise and Grain, Turbulent Noise. Set the brightness to 20. And in Transform, uncheck Uniform Scaling. Set the width to 20 and the height to 5. Alt-click on the evolution and type in time times 1000, so we get a real churning of the water. Then alt-click on the offset, and we're going to animate this moving up. Type in square bracket 0, comma, time times -50, close square bracket. So the water will move upwards, which is our black hole point when wrapped around a sphere. Now to add some colour. Go to Effect, Color Correction, Tritone. Set the mid-tones to a dark blue. This is the hex code I used. And set the shadows a little lighter. Now, let's look at the opposite. Create a new solid, call it Dust. And duplicate the cracks pre-comp again and set Dust to use this as an alpha track matte. Add a turbulent noise effect. Set the type to Dynamic Twist. Set the contrast to 200 and the brightness to 20. And then in Transform, scale it down to 20. And let's do that offset trick again. Alt-click and then type in brace, see I do know the correct term, 0, comma, time times -80. So it moves at a different speed to the water. Make sure everything is closed. And then on the evolution put in time times 300. This will give us some change but not churning like the oceans. Add a tritone effect. And I use the eyedropper initially to get the following colours. Now to cut this out for the continents we do want some of it going into the water. So duplicate our original Earth diffuse layer. Drag it to the bottom of the comp. Undo the track matte by setting it to none and solo it. Go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, Directional Blur, and set this to about 170. Padlock the layer and turn it off. Back on the dust layer, set an Add Matte effect. Point it to our blurry earth, and set the type to Luminance. To give the dust more detail, duplicate the turbulent noise effect. Drag it below the tritone effect, and then just play with the settings. Drop the scale, change the evolution for this effect, and so on. And in the effects transfer mode, set it to multiply. Okay, we're going to step back from the surface for a moment. Back in the main comp, turn on the clouds orb layer, and now go into the clouds pre-comp, and you can turn off all the extra layers. If you were starting with Andrew Kramer's project, then you just need to turn this layer into a pre-comp. Starting at 0 seconds, set a keyframe for the position, and at 30 seconds, set a new keyframe moving the entire layer up out of shot. If you hold shift while dragging, After Effects will lock the drag to the Y direction. Now go to Effect, Transition, Linear Wipe. Set the angle to 0 and set the amount to 15% and the feather to 100, so we fade out the bottom. And now, here's a neat trick. Create a new adjustment layer, add another linear wipe effect, set the amount to 2% and the angle to 180, and the feather to 20. So at the centre of the black hole, we fade out the clouds. Now go to Effect, Distort, CC Bender. Set the amount to 14 and adjust the top and bottom so that the top is 1000 by 0 and the bottom is 1000 by 150. This will create a spinning effect for the clouds. Let's set keyframes for the amount for the first 15 seconds, so set it at 0 to begin with, and to fill in the corner, back on the clouds layer, go to Effect, Stylize, CC Reptile, and set the expand left value to fill in the gap. And back in our main comp, on the atmosphere orb layer, keyframe the opacity to begin fading out around the 20-second mark and completely gone by 30 seconds. And then, I don't know if it makes a difference, but select all 3 of the top orb layers and at 30 seconds, hold the Alt key and tap the left square bracket to trim them. And around the same timescale, keyframe the surface orb's spectacular and glossiness values to drop to 0. Okay, there's still loads to do, so now let's create a pre-comp for the Illuminate layer. And from the project panel, drag in our cracks pre-comp and set the illumination map to use this as an alpha invert, so that as the ground cracks, the lights go off. And then copy the lava layer from our Earth surface pre-comp, duplicate the cracks pre-comp and set the lava to use this as a luma mat. And add a black solid to the bottom of the comp. And back in the main comp, let's move the sun around so we see more shadow. And previewing that. Oh yeah, that looks really cool. Make a pre-comp of the normal layer. Drag in our cracks pre-comp, add a black solid, and set its track matte to alpha from the cracks pre-comp, and set the transfer mode to overlay. And drop the opacity to 35%. And add a turbulent noise effect, setting its scale to 5. Okay, that's the surface broken up. In the surface pre-comp, select the oceans layer and tap T to expose the opacity. And at the 15-second mark, set a keyframe, and then to correspond this to the loss of atmosphere at 25 seconds, set a new keyframe to 0%. Now we see the original surface map, but it's got magma underneath. So it looks okay, but we're going to fade that out. So select the Earth diffuse layer and go to Effect, Color Correction, and for fun let's go with Colorama this time. Expand Output Cycle and select Sepia 2. And as we're still at 25 seconds, set a keyframe for Blend with Original, and then 10 seconds back, set the value to 100%. So the sepia-ness fades on to give us this sandy ocean bed. Okay, now to destroy the crust. Go to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, and make sure it's at the top of the comp. Go to Effect, Transition, Linear Wipe. Set the amount to 2%. Set the angle to 180 and the feather to 20. Switching back to the main comp for a moment, look what that does. It creates a void on the surface, which looks great, but we need to keyframe it. At 5 seconds, set linear wipe to 0%, and at 25 seconds, set it to 2%. Now go to Layer, New, Solid, and create a comp-sized solid and name it Gradient. And then go to Effect, Generate, Ramp. And then go to Effect, Noise and Grain, Turbulent Noise. Set the type to Dynamic Twist. Set the contrast to 300 and the brightness to 15. And in Transform, set the scale to 20. In the Effects Blending mode, set the type to Multiply. Turn off the layer's visibility. Back in the adjustment layer, go to Effect, Transition, Gradient Wipe. Set the gradient to our gradient layer with effects and masks. And keyframe the transition from 25 seconds to be complete at 45 seconds. Which looks okay, but a bit dull. So go to Effect, Transition, CC Scale Wipe. Set the amount to 2. And then at 25 seconds, set a keyframe for the center to be 1000 by 0. And at 45 seconds, set a keyframe to be about 500 pixels below the bottom of the comp. So we get this effect. Grab the linear wipe effect and drop it below the scale wipe so we keep our void. Back in the main comp, in the planet orb effect, in Material Advanced Options, keyframe the edge feather at 25 seconds to 35 seconds to go from 0 to 0.2. And finally, copy the gradient and adjustment layers to the illumination pre-comp so that those cracks behave in the same way. Okay, now for the mantle and core. I'm going to use 3D layers with turbulent noise on them. So before I do that, I'm going to set my camera move so this will inform the direction and shape of the layers. Create a new null object, make it 3D and name it black hole null. And using the view controls, position it approximately where your black hole is. Expand your camera's transform controls and use the pick whip to link to the point of interest of this black hole null. And set a keyframe for the position, and later in the timeline fly your camera around. Make a new solid, make it 400 pixels by 400 pixels so the width matches the diameter of the orb, and make it 3D. Parent it to the black hole null, and in transform properties zero out the position and set the anchor to be 500 on the x-axis, and then go to Layer, Transform, Auto Orient, and choose Orient towards Camera. Drag this layer below the orb layer, and in its rotation controls tweak the Y rotation so that it's better lined up with the planet. And now solo this layer, and go to Effect, Generate, Circle, and set the radius to match the orb's radius, 200, and feather the outer edge. And set the type to Stencil Alpha. This gives us a cool looking edge later. Call this layer Debris. Then add a turbulent noise effect. Set the type to Small Bumps the contrast to 110 and the brightness to 34. And for the evolution, add an expression time times 50. Duplicate this effect, either by Ctrl and D or by going to Edit, Duplicate. We're going to add some more detail. Change the type to Basic, contrast to 330, brightness to -50, and drop the scale to 15 or so. And set the effect's blending mode to Screen. And now, here's another neat trick. When everything is put together, the movement of the orb's surface will end up being a lot faster than the movement of the debris, which is right, as we want that to fade off first. But, to help blend this in, I'm going to match the speed using this second turbulent noise. But this might need a lot of adjustment, so to make life easier, I'm going to set a keyframe for the offset, and then a second one a few seconds later, moving all the detail to the right, to where the black hole is. Then holding Alt, I'll click on the stopwatch and type. Loop out, note the capital O, brackets, quotes, continue, close quotes and brackets. This will cause After Effects to keep the movement going at the same speed after the second keyframe. Now, if I bring back the orb sphere for a moment, all I have to do is move the second keyframe for timing until I'm happy that the speed matches. This use of offset does cause its own issue with something later on though, so to avoid that, set a keyframe for the effect's opacity at around 30 seconds and a second one to 0% at around 45 seconds. Next, go to Effect, Keying, Extract, and bring the black point up to punch gaps in this cloud. And set the black softness too. Now, rather than manually move the circle and offset value of the noise, I'm going to add a transform effect and keyframe the position to move the whole thing off the layer, as if it's being pulled into the black hole. So go to Effect, Distort, Transform, and set a position keyframe at 35 seconds, and then at 1 minute set a new one, having moved the X value up past 600. And right click on the initial keyframe and go to Keyframe Assistant Easy Ease Out. To make as if it's being squeezed, go to Effect, Distort, Bezier Warp. And at 30 seconds, set keyframes for the default values. At 45 seconds, drag in all the right points to create a funnel type shape. Now we can see the end result thanks to the transform effect. Select the circle effect and holding Ctrl tap D to duplicate it, and drag this below the Bezier Warp effect, so the circle acts as the layer's mat. And add a tritone effect with some nice earth colours. Duplicate this debris layer. Hit enter and rename it Core. Unsolo the debris layer. Turn off all the effects for a moment one by one. Drop the first circle's radius down to 150. For turbulent noise, set the type to max, contrast to 200, brightness to 50. Delete the extract and tritone effects and add in colorama. Set the output to fire. Drag this above transform and then go to Effect, Stylize, Roughen Edges. Set the amount to 125 and expressionize the evolution. Yes, I'm bringing that back. Add time times 20. Re-solo the debris layer, and it's looking kinda okay, but we can do better. Go to Effect, Channel, Set Matte. Point it to the debris layer and Effects and Masks. This effect is using the debris layer's alpha channel, which is cool in itself, but we can make this better. Check Invert Matte So now we only see the core layer as if it were behind the debris layer. But I'm going to add some light rays, and I want these to appear on top of the debris. Now the debris field is a little thick. Rather than alter the extract value though, duplicate the debris layer and go to Effect, Matte Choker. And bring the choke 1 up to about 125. Back on the core layer, point Set Matte to the debris copy. And there, now we get this bleed through effect. Go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, CC Radial Fast Blur. And up the amount to 85, and then keyframe the center so that it moves over the black hole, but has started in the middle of the globe. And it's looking a little dim, so I added Video Copalette's free Color Vibrance effect to bring back that orange flame look. And that's it, you're done! Just add a 360 star field, which this tutorial shows you how to. This was epic. I'm sorry it's taken so long to cover, but there's so many different effects going on here. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and it's given me lots of ideas. So you can expect to see more in a Breaking Earth playlist.